I gave this talk on Friday night. The Grand Canyon is a huge clue. God's clues, they're everywhere. They point to God. But if you go to their national monument, you aren't going to see the answer. They're going to say that the river carved the canyon. And when they start saying that, that's when you got to start asking teachers and guides these questions. It's like, how did a river flow uphill? Because that had to happen. You know, the river flows in at 3,100 feet and flows out at 1,200 feet, and in the middle, that canyon rises a mile above the river. So it's not going to flow uphill. And how come it didn't flow around that Kiabab Plateau? Grand Canyon goes right through it. How do you get real flat layers? It's like somebody put a plumb line down and just built it up, just perfectly straight. And why isn't there any erosion between there? How do you get slanted layers underneath flat layers? That's a real hard one for those evolutionists. And then also, that's what you see, slanted under flat. And why are 7 of the 12 layers missing in the Grand Canyon? Let's say, well, the first 5 got taken off, but what about those bottom 2? And then why are there millions of years of evolution missing? And how does a river cut a canyon 18 miles wide? And how do you get side canyons? They're just as deep as Grand Canyon, but there's no river. How does that happen? And why are they longer to the north than to the south? And there was a guy, he gave these tours, and he said, I dug the Grand Canyon. And a little kid said, hey, where'd you put the dirt? And that question haunted him the rest of his life, because where did 800 cubic miles of sediment go? To put this in perspective, all the other rivers in the whole world, they've only eroded 300 cubic miles. So how did one little river do all that? And even before you did that, you had to move 2,000 cubic miles of sediment. How does all this happen? What force could do that? How does this 5 to 10 rock get raised up into this sedimentary rock? It came from down on the bottom, and now it got lifted up. That's not in their website. And that particular rock is at that place. And then the inner gorge. It's how did that 46-mile crack go? I mean, the river should have cut the sedimentary rock, which was softer, but it didn't. It cut into that Vishnu schist. And then these are a little more complicated questions. I don't have time to go through them. And how did that funnel form? You see that up there? That's the key to the whole thing. Because you got these Vermilion Cliffs on one side at 7,200 feet, and then you got Echo Cliffs at 6,700. It was all connected at one time. You got Marble Canyon there. And then you got this pothole. There are these potholes that they're formed by a stone getting in a fast-moving current, and it digs down. How do you get a pothole 3,300 feet above the river on a 2,000-foot cliff 4 miles away from the river? They don't put that in that national website. And then these barbed canyons, that's really hard. I had a brother-in-law who took a geology class at St. Cloud State, and they couldn't figure out how the Grand Canyon formed. They spent a week on it, and Friday the professor said, there's one theory we haven't talked about. Kid says, raises his hand and says, he goes, anybody know what it is? He says, yeah. Is it Noah's flood? And the professor said, yeah, but we can't talk about it. And my brother-in-law, he said that this is something they could never explain. Because what you see is the land is sloping down towards the northeast, and yet the river's flowing to the southwest. Very unusual. Very, very unusual. So I did the elevation of this barb right there. It started at 55 and ended at 53, so it dropped 200 feet. This one went from 47 to 4,500, so that dropped another 200. This one from 4,600 to 4,500, so that dropped 100 feet. This one went to 4,800 to 4,500, dropped 300 feet. Now it dropped 200 feet. So it's all sloping to the northeast, and yet the river flows to the southwest. Very unusual. And why didn't the river flow around the Kiabab Plateau? And I use that elevation site again. And wherever you click, it shows the elevation. So that's 9,000 feet, 8,000 feet. Right at the edge, it's 7,300 feet. Go across the canyon, and it's 7,000 feet. So it's at least 7,000 feet. And that river over here, it should have flowed over here. It's only 4,800 feet, 5,000. It should have flowed around the south end, and it could have flown around the north end too. So why did it go right through there? And what force causes a plateau to raise a mile in the air? And how did Red Butte form? And it's 1,000-foot worth of sediment capped with volcanic rock. Okay, here's the government answers. This is their website. I updated this last week. And it says the story of how the Grand Canyon came to be. Again, it's a story. Blah, blah, blah. And the story begins about 2 billion years ago. Blah, blah, blah. And it's a story. It's not science. Science is observable, testable, repeatable. This is a story. And this is what they're saying. And even the college textbooks say the same thing. The origin of the geosphere is the story of the birth of our planet. The story begins. Blah, blah, blah. So it's all a story. This is not science. And if you don't catch that right at the beginning, you're going to think it's science. And they say scientists know that the Colorado River carved the canyon. Well, if they believe that, they'll never explain any of those questions. The river could not have carved that canyon. And it says the Kiabab Plateau, a high point through which the river gingerly slices, poses a problem for geologists. What is it? Water certainly doesn't flow uphill. And we talked about that. And it's on their website. And then it says, while keeping these few accepted chapters in the Grand Canyon history book in mind, they make hypotheses. So the main chapter that they're not going to get rid of is that the river carved the canyon, and that's baloney. And so why are there millions of years of sediment missing? Well, here's a Forbes article. Mystery of the Grand Canyon's missing billions of years may be solved thanks to a new tectonic model. They didn't talk about that on the website. There's missing billions of years. The great unconformity has perplexed geologists for 150 years. It says the 500 million year old Tipit sandstone is directly overlaying the 1.4 to 1.8 billion year old Vishnu cyst. So there's a billion years missing there, and they know that. Just think of the red bluffs and cliffs of the Grand Canyon as Earth's history textbook. You can jump back almost 2 billion years into the planet's past. But that textbook is also missing pages. In some areas, more than 1 billion years worth of rocks have disappeared. So how did that happen? So they do these just so stories. Okay, the team reports that a series of small yet violent faulting events may have rocked the region during a breakup of an ancient continent. The resulting havoc likely tore up the ground around the canyon, causing the sediment to wash away. Likely and may have are not science words. Okay, and so here's the four theories of how the Grand Canyon got there. None of them work. Little Grand Canyon hypotheses. In order for this theory to work, the ancient Colorado River would have needed to flow eastward over the continental divide. Well, that didn't happen, so throw that out. And the northwest flowing river, in order for this to work, the Kiabab Plateau couldn't quite look like it does today. And so throw that one out too. And then there's the spillover theory. This is where the draining of ancient lakes, and that's right, but they got the lake in the wrong spot, the lakes in the wrong spot. The Colorado River was temporarily dammed behind the Kiabab Plateau. Well, we took a look at that, didn't we? It would have flowed around it on the bottom or on the top, so this one doesn't work either. And then they got one about the collapsing groundwater. And if you want to see what's wrong with all of these, go into rsr.org, that's Real Science Radio, and search Grand Canyon Month. And you can see this on Walt Brown. I got a book in there. He compares all the theories. And green says it explains it perfectly, red says it doesn't at all, and yellow is maybe. So we're going to hit all those as the talk goes on. But these are the conclusions that the evolutionists have. Okay, conclusions based on assumptions. And it's all based on the geologic column. They're basing all that millions of years. That's the New Testament for an atheist, the geologic column. Okay, and they won't change it. Based on millions of years. So let's take a look at that. When was that put together? It was before radiometric dating, and it was finalized in 1879. That's the same year the light bulb was invented. So this is horse and buggy technology. And this is their website again. This page isn't there anymore, but it was back then when I did it before. And it says layers from the Cambrian, Devonian, Mississippian, Pennsylvanian, and Permian periods are present. That's pretty straightforward, but it's very deceptive because they're missing two. Why they ignore that the missing Silurian or Ordovician? They're missing those two, so that's a very deceptive statement, and thankfully they took it down. This is an education thing for the children. Over millions of years, these bones, shells, footprints, leaves, and other remains turned into stone. How do footprints turn into stone? I mean, how long do footprints last? It's not millions of years. And their fossils points to a flood. You know those dead raccoons on the side of the road, are they going to turn into a fossil? No, they're going to get decomposed and scavenged. The only way they turn into a fossil is if they're buried rapidly. Therefore, those layers that were laid down, if a layer has fossils in it, it was laid down rapidly. And that's the whole geologic column. That's sign of a flood, not millions of years. And these are fossils that they find they find these nautiloids in the Grand Canyon. And they find them 1 per square yard. There's probably billions of them down there. And all pointed in the same direction, all the way to Las Vegas. And 15% of them are standing upright. And I was able to ride on a bus with Steve Austin, and he said, yeah, he documented them all. And he gave the report to the national parks, and they took away his permit. It's real. They don't want anything pointing to God. And how are they going to stand on their head for 15? 15% of them are vertical. And when you look at how slow those layers supposedly came down, I mean, red wall limestone, that's 500 feet, and it's supposedly 50 million years. Well, you do the math, and it's 100,000 years for a foot. Do some more math, and that's 8,000 years per inch. So that thing's going to stand vertically for tens of thousands of years to get covered up? No, it doesn't make sense that way. And then this one's not on their website either, but it asks a good question. Perhaps the biggest question of all, how the Colorado River shows the course to begin carving the canyon awaits a clear answer. I've got the answer. We got the answer. Okay, here's the answer. Okay, bulging and cracking. That's the key to the whole Grand Canyon. 3 times something bulged and then it cracked. And to set the stage for this, we've got to look at, to set the stage, we got to get the layers laid down first before we can have the river cut them. And that's going to start with the hydroplate theory. And I don't have time to explain it now, but there is going to be a hydroplate conference in September 21st to the 22nd where it explains it. And to jump in right in the middle of the hydroplate, North America and South America are sliding to the west, friction-free. Okay, it's like those air hockey, no friction. They're sliding to the west because the Atlantic Ocean bulged and cracked, just like Grand Canyon. So it's going to the west, and then it's going to keep going until it meets resistance or runs out of water. And then there's going to be a tremendous force. That's what's going to crack the Vishnu schist, and that's why. And this is Gunnison Canyon. Anybody ever seen that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And to scale, that's 15-foot trees on top. And so what happened there, that got crushed. The weakest part of granite is quartz, and that's going to melt, and that's what filled in the white layers. Okay, and they get the same thing at the bottom of Grand Canyon. Vishnu schist got crushed like that. What force is going to do that? Well, that's the continent sliding. Okay, and then it's going to buckle. So now some of them are going to be up higher, and they're going to get sheared off. And so some of those layers, that's how you get the flat layers on top of the slanted layers. And you see that in the Grand Canyon. And how did they get so flat? Some people think it was by liquefaction with all the water and the waves going over. It'll sort it out that way. And also it could be all that moving water, all that mud moving at once is going to sort out into the different densities. And that's what Henry Morris found when they had this thing in St. Paul where it looks at the Mississippi River and how they lay down the layers. And so he says that the moving water will do that too. And then that's probably what happened there. It got bulged and it cracked, or got sheared off. And then that rock, how did that get lifted up? Well, the mud's still moving, that rock breaks off, the mud's going to lift it up a little bit, and that's where it sits. Evolutionists can't explain that. These are anomalies that their theories cannot explain. But this theory, called the hydroplate, explains it perfectly. And then how do you raise a plateau? Well, the mountains rose up, when it buckled, the mountains rose up, and so you got a big mass on a small base, so that's going to sink in. Something sinks in, something else has to rise up, so the plateau's block vaulted going up. Block by block, it kept going up. And so what's the force of that? It's gravity with the hydraulics. And so it's gonna block fault up, and some of the lava might get to the top and get on top of the ground, on top of the sediment, and then if a bunch of water comes by, it's gonna erode not the lava, but around the lava, and that's how you get Red Butte. 1,000 feet of sediment with some lava on top. That's what happened. Okay, so Grand Canyon, 800 cubic miles has to be eroded. How do you do that? Well, even before you do that, you got to move 2,000 cubic miles of sediment with the Great Denudation. And so what's the force for that? And again, it goes back to that funnel. That thing's 12 miles wide. Just think of everything on top of that red line is filled in with sediment. So that's holding back a big dam, big dams. And these are pictures of it, Echo Cliffs, and then way across the distance, there's Vermilion Cliffs. And this is the Marble Canyon there. There's a crack in between those two canyons, and that's where the Colorado River is flowing. So why did that canyon crack? What happened to all that sediment? It washed away. Where did the water come from? 2 big lakes, Grand Lake and Hopi Lake. You can still see that orangish color. That's the bottoms of the lake. And they're huge, huge lakes. And that's where you get the Grand Circle. You got Bryce and Zion and Monument Valley and Canyonlands and Petrified Forest, all those very unusual features, and it's all because of this lake and that sediment, and it all got saturated, and when it drained, it left those features behind it. I'm not going to look at all of them, but I'll look at arches. Anybody been to arches? Okay, arches. And there's a lot of these arches are falling, and you can list at rsr.org, list of collapsing natural bridges, geological formations, and you can listen at about 1 a year, one breaks, 1 or 2 a year an arch collapses. And so Randy Galuza would say, well, hey, what process today is making the arches? We don't see them being made. They're collapsing at 1 or 2 a year. We don't see 1 or 2 a year being formed. And then also Monument Valley, how did that form? Well, there's 1,400 feet of sandstone underneath those mesas, buttes, and plateaus. That means that was all full of sand. And so what happened was, this is a big lake, probably 500 feet of water up there. And when that lake drained, all that water pressure is not there, so the water comes up from the subsurface, and it's going to take the path of least resistance, and if there's something hard on top or an island, it's going to erode out the sides. That's how the mesas, buttes, and spires form. And that's the second most video that I have out there. It's just a clip on how that happened. Okay, so and then there's Petrified National Forest. Anybody been there? Okay, where did that wood come from? How come it's there? What's the bottom of Hopi Lake? Walt Brown says there was silica in the water, and when it cooled down, that silica had to go somewhere, so it went into the wood and petrified the wood. And it all makes perfect sense. You know, that's what happens. It just criminalized the wood. And if you want to see more of that Grand Circle stuff, you go into missionimperative.org and watch the Grand Canyon, the puzzle on the plateau. Mike Snavely does a really good job with that. Plus he talks about the Grand Staircase, which I think got eroded away during the flood with these big waves cutting, moving all that. Okay, so let's take a look at these lakes. Okay, Grand Lake. It's in a part of Colorado, Utah, and New Mexico, and Arizona. It's everywhere. Okay, it's got a 5,000 foot elevation. It's twice as much water as Lake Michigan. It's got 2,100 cubic miles of water. So there's a lot of water there. Grand Junction, Colorado, where that is today, there would have been 1,100 feet above it. That lake would have been 1,100 feet deep there. And at Page, Arizona, it would have been 1,400 feet deep. Or that could have been sediment. That could have been under 1,400 feet of sediment. That's right where that funnel is. And Farmington, New Mexico would have had 300 feet, 350 feet on it. And then let's take a look at Hopi Lake. It's not quite as big, but it's 250 feet higher. So it's got that much more potential energy. And then it's 5,950 feet high. And it's got as much water as Lake Huron, 840 cubic miles of water. So there's a lot of water there, and if these cities, there would have been 1,000 feet over Tuba City, 1,000 feet over Winslow, Arizona, and 900 feet over Holbrook. So these are extremely deep lakes with incredible water. And that brings us to the funnel. Okay, the funnel, that's Vermilion Cliff right there on the left. It's holding back Grand Lake. And they'll say there was never a lake there, there's no shoreline. Well, that's right, because the blocks are coming up, so it's such an irregular shoreline, it's not going to be in one place long enough to make a shore. And then they'll say, well, there can't be a lake there because there's no lake bottom, there's no lake sediment there. That's right, because it all got washed away with the water draining out of the subsurface. It was drained so fastly, all those sediments went. And so what caused it to overflow? It could have been one of those blocks come up and it caused it to start draining, or it could have been it tipped somehow and started to drain, or there could have been even multiple. Brown says there might even been another lake above it that broke, and then it made this one overflow. But whatever happened, it went over the top. Like we make those sandcastles at the beach, make that thing, and they all washes away real quickly. That's what's happening here. It starts a little bit, and then it's just going wider and wider and getting faster and faster. That's how that pothole formed. And then 2,000 feet of sediment gets eroded away next to that pothole. And it keeps going down, down, down until it hits the Kiabab limestone, which is harder than the sediment. So then it hits that and then it spreads out. And to give you a view, an idea of how much water this was, anybody been to Grand Canyon? You guys have seen everything.
You mean Niagara Falls?
Niagara Falls, yeah. Niagara Falls is about 3/4 of a mile from up there. But if you put that in the big funnel, that's Niagara Falls. Incredible water coming through there. Water can do a lot of damage. And the challenge at Glen Canyon, for a while in 1983, sheets of plywood were all that kept the mighty Glen Canyon Dam from overflowing. And so they had those spillways going. You see those spillways? Just going like crazy, and there's a man standing there, and all that water's going through, and there's this thing called cavitation where it kind of implodes. And it made this, and it started, rocks and sheets were coming up. They had to shut down that spillway. And it cut this hole in that spillway, 32 feet deep, 40 feet wide, and 150 feet long. And it's powerful. Same thing happened in New Braunfels, Texas. There was 30 inches of rain that went through there one week, and it cut it all out. Yeah, in 2002, the spillway overflowed, and the river carved a canyon 1 mile long, over 50 feet deep, and hundreds of yards wide through solid limestone rock. And it goes on to say that what would have taken nature thousands of years to create was created in about 24 hours. And we saw the same thing at Mount St. Helens. Who's been there? Oh, okay, put that on the bucket list. But there was a canyon. There was a canyon that was cut, there was a mud flow, cut 1,000 feet wide, 140 feet deep in 9 hours. If we didn't see that happen, we'd say, see that little Toutle River that cut that canyon over millions of years? But it didn't. Okay, now we come to what happened, bulging and cracking. If you had a water balloon and you're trying to squeeze it in your hand, it's going to bulge out where there's no pressure. Okay, let's jump up to the funnel again. It's taking all that 2,000 feet of sediment off before it hits the hard Kiabab limestone. And so now there's no pressure pushing down on it, so it's going to bulge up. There's the bulge, and it's not very strong when it's bulging, so then it cracks. And so then the river goes through the crack. And also on the sides, you can see how the sides are pointed up, kind of like what you would see with the bulge. Okay, and so then the river flows through that crack. That's how it cracked, and then it flows down and it undercuts Hopi Lake. So now you got a real catastrophe on your hands. This is 250 feet higher, and Walt Brown says that it was 13 times higher than Niagara Falls, with possibly 100 times more volume of water flowing through it. So that's just going to it's just going to sheet erode everything on top of that Kiabab limestone. And it's going to, then there's nothing pushing down, so it bulges, Kiabab, that's how the Kiabab Plateau forms. It bulges, so now you got this real unique feature with those barbed canyons. It bulges, so now the subsurface water is flowing downhill to the northeast, and yet the river's flowing southwest. And when it hits the river, it's going to make a real quick U-turn. And some of that stuff wasn't even stone yet. It was still mud. When you look at these layers there, it's like it all just slumped. It hadn't turned to stone yet. And you can see these pictures on Google Earth, I believe. So then it bulges. Well, what happens when it bulges? Well, now it's going to crack. And then all that water's going through the crack, right through the middle of that plateau. And it rose a little higher to the north to this so there's more erosion. And that's how you get the side canyons on the north and the south. The side canyons are just water draining into the river, which is cutting below the water table. So the water is just gushing out of the sides of the canyons, and it's taking dirt with them. So that's how you get the long side canyons without any river. Okay, that's how you get the deep sideless canyons. Okay, so what happened now is now Grand Canyon, you got 800 cubic miles or whatever missing. There's nothing pushing down on the inner gorge. And when it cuts through that inner gorge, it's 46 miles long, right through the Kiabab Plateau. When it's cutting down, it should hit that hard granite and it should spread out. It should have got wider there, but it didn't. Because there's not only did all those layers start bulging, the basement rock starts to bulge and cracks. That's how the inner gorge forms, and then the water goes through that crack. Inner gorge is not smooth over millions of years. It's still rather rough. It's not millions of years old. Okay, so where did all the dirt go? Where did all the sediment go? 800 cubic miles has to go somewhere. And when you look at the delta of the Colorado River, it's small. There's not 800 cubic miles of there. If that little river cut that canyon, it would have come down, mud by mud, but it would hit the ocean and it would stop, and you'd have a huge delta, but you don't have that. And so where'd all the dirt go? Well, there was a floodplain, maybe a couple hundred miles wide on each side of that river. Walt Brown says when you're traveling east to west in that area, about 100 or 200 miles from the Colorado River, when you drive over these river beds, you look up, just slow down and look up the creek, and you're going to see sand and rounded boulders. And rounded boulders, and big ones, that means it was a powerful flow. And the sand is still there, it means it didn't wash away, so it stopped abruptly. And that's where a lot of that sand is on that big floodplain on either side. Plus, it was coming down with so much force, it went way out into the Gulf of Mexico, or Gulf of California. A lot of it went way out there, it had so much momentum. And they found large rounded boulders found a mile away, 100 feet above the river at Bullhead City. This is Bullhead City, 200 miles from Grand Canyon. So, how does that happen? Okay, and so Walt Brown, he's got this theory, another creationist has another theory, and they say, okay, let's get a bunch of geologists and go to Grand Canyon. And Walt had 3 days to show him all the things he had to support his theory, and the other guy was going to have 3 days. And so Walt Brown, I suppose, he showed him those potholes and that rock and everything that validates what he had to say. And then the guy, and I blanked out his name, I just didn't feel right about that. But if you want to know who it was, go into rsr.org/HPT for hydroplate and go into the 9th edition. It's on page 564. But that other geologist, when it was his turn to show that evidence for his theory, He says he didn't have any, and they left. And then he goes on to write how Walt Brown's theory doesn't work. So it's very unusual. Okay, so let's review real quick review. Okay, Colorado, for this, why isn't there Grand Canyons all over the world? It's because we needed 2 lakes, we needed a bunch of water on a plateau with all that potential energy, just waiting for it to start overflowing. So that's why it's not everywhere in the world. And people say, well, you got big canyons underneath the ocean. And that's true. That came after the flood. Continents were higher, lakes were lower, oceans were lower. That's true. Yeah, you have big canyons there. But that's like saying, well, and so it shouldn't be unusual to have them a mile above the ocean, a mile above sea level. And he says, well, that's like finding a cruise liner, a big yacht, a mile up on a desert. Well, and you'd say, well, it's not unusual because they're in the ocean. Yeah, but it'd be very unusual to have it in a desert a mile above. So that doesn't work. And then you got 2 great lakes, 2 huge lakes, double the size of Lake Michigan and Lake Huron up there, all that potential water 1,000 feet above where cities are today. It went over the top and caused that pothole. A rock got in there, started swirling around, and made that pothole. And then the Marble Canyon bulged, Kiabab limestone bulged, and the water ran through that crack and undercut Hopi Lake, which now you got a huge flow of water, just sheet eroding everything off the Kiabab limestone, so there's nothing pushing down on it. So the plateau forms, bulges, cracks, the water runs through the middle of it, and now it's the basement rock has nothing pushing on it, and so that's how you get the inner gorge, and that's how you get Grand Canyon. Okay, so again, the key is bulging and cracking. And if you want more information on that, go into rsr.org, and you can order Brian Nichols' Hydroplate Theory, The Origin of the Grand Canyon. A lot of those graphics he made, must have took him forever to get those graphics, but it's so easy to see it. And that's the best Grand Canyon video that I've seen. And it answers so much. And then if you're interested in the hydroplate, you can see the 9th edition online. I've also got a book there. And also there's that hydroplate conference coming up September 1, 2, and 3, where it's free, online. You just have to register. Or just put your email in, we'll send you. And Saturday's talk is going to be really good with Kevin Lee, because he uses the hydroplate theory to predict what they're going to find in a comet. And he told them, you're going to find this, this, and this in the comet. And they said, no, we're going to find X, Y, Z instead of A, B, C. And it was all based on it coming from the Earth. And it's an amazing, amazing theory. I encourage people to talk about that. So again, a special thanks to Dr. Walt Brown for thinking of this. He's like today's Isaac Newton. And yet we haven't heard of his theory, which is a shame. If we would have been banging this theory the last 40 years, we'd have so much scientific clout. But it's been censored. And I hate censorship. You'll learn about more of that in the next hour. And then thank Brian Nickel for making the the graphics. And then Bob Enyart and Fred Williams for doing Real Science Radio. I don't know what you guys listen to when you're driving, but I listen to rsr.org. You can download the shows. And I learned so much. It's a traveling university. I learned so much about creation. And listen to those Grand Canyon shows over and over and over on the way out here. And on the way back, I'm going to listen to the hydroplate shows over and over and over again. And they just do a really good job. They did interview me on Friday, or no, when was it? They interviewed me and they put it up on YouTube. It was information. I believe everybody should have all the information to make informed decisions. And that includes with vaccines for our babies. And so they interviewed me about that, and YouTube censored it. And so now that's kind of... But because it's censored, more people have seen that one than any other one that they've had. Because people want to see what's being censored. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But I think I'm going to cut it short and give you guys some time. You guys probably have, that's the origin of the Grand Canyon. It fits perfectly with the biblical theory. And we need to talk to people about this stuff. This was an email that, and I put this in there. I go to college and stuff and have questions. And this was at a community college. How did we get here? Was it creation or evolution? And creation won, actually. It's a lot closer than you think. And at our community college at St. Cloud, it won by a lot. I don't have time to show them all. But I asked the guy when he stroked under creation, I said, why'd you put it there? And he said, well, that's where everyone else had theirs. And so what we have here, 15 to 20% on each side, you're never going to change their mind. But the middle, 60 to 70%, they'll go wherever the current brings them. So we need to start bringing this creation thing into the mainstream and bring it up so people talk about it. I do have a YouTube channel called Solidify Your Faith, where you can check out some of these creation materials. And then I got an email from somebody. I've been praying that God would send intelligent Christian clients who would talk to him. They've been praying for somebody to get saved. And Brian, you've been an answer to prayer. Your conversation with Dan has opened his mind. I believe he's been watching your videos a bit because he shared one with me. Now, well, that's pretty flattering or encouraging. I said, well, which video did he show? Because I do dinosaurs, I do science, I do astronomy, I'll do all these kinds. And she said it was this one. It was my hydroplate. I had 20 minutes to speak at the Rotary Club, and I got him up to speed on the hydroplate. And that's a quick overview, 20 minutes. And again, if you want to see more about that hydroplate conference, hydroplate.org for more information.